COVID-19. What does this global pandemic mean for the moving industry? We're about to find out. Hello and welcome to Arpin Group's International Insights, the micro-series that focuses on the trends and happenings that affect the international household goods, moving and storage industry from the perspective of industry leaders from throughout the world. My name is Linda Casey and I'm so happy to be bringing you the inaugural episode of this series. Our very first show is a 4-part special that is going to focus on possibly the most dramatic occurrence to hit the moving industry since 9/11, and that's the COVID-19 pandemic. In part 1, we'll get a global update from regional markets from around the world on how their regions are managing COVID-19. Part 2, we'll hear about international borders. Are governments restricting entrance and travel? And if they are, what are some of the things you can expect? Part 3, we'll learn how clients are managing the situation and what we're doing from within the industry to help them. Part 4 looks at post-pandemic. What are the regional economies going to look like and what's in store for the moving industry itself once COVID-19 passes? Our global panel for this 4-part special are representing Ireland and the United Kingdom, Keith Whelan, Arpin International Group's Managing Director, Ireland. Representing Germany and the mainland EU, Sebastian Sommer, Arpin International Group's Managing Director, Germany. Representing the Middle East and India, Lauren Inglis, Arpin International Group's Regional Director of the Middle East and India. Representing Singapore and Australia, Michael Johnsen, Arpin International Group's Vice President, Asia Pacific region. Representing China, Michael Hughes, Arpin Group's Vice President, Global Business Development. And rounding off our panel from the United States is host and moderator Jim Esposito, Arpin Group's Vice President, Global Strategy. I would like to now invite you to part 1 of our series, COVID-19's impact on the moving industry, with our international panel already in queue and Jim Esposito ready to go.
Keith, how are the people in the government of Ireland dealing with the current conditions of COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, the people are generally compliant with whatever the government is saying. It's been going on quite a while now, so there is a little bit of people fatigue amongst the population. But generally, the government have taken a very conservative approach and are emphasising health, but trying to balance that with the economy. So just this week, they saw an escalation in cases, and the NEFIT, the people that actually decide on the public health side of things, have recommended a strict lockdown with an idea of stopping the economy for 4 weeks to try and eliminate the virus. The government went against that and decided that they needed to protect the economy and to keep things going. So the process has very much been an approach where they restrict movement of people, but encourage children to go to school, businesses to operate, and people to work. So that's basically the way they're going to keep going from here. If they see cases rise, they'll increase the restrictions, but otherwise it's very pro-business, but with safety in mind.
Oh, excellent. Sebastian, what about in Germany? How things going there?
Yeah, talking about Germany, it seems that in some areas the new normal is already implemented, and in some areas they do not accept it at all. So it's not easy and very complex for the government to deal with it. And the main issue, we see that the European Union is not answering in one language. And as Keith mentioned, that some countries have now stricter restrictions, and in other countries, they open up and have a different approach. So therefore, that's something we see. And this is the complexity we will have going forward as well in doing moves and seeing assignments, that the answer is not one. And we see different answers from different countries cities, and even within cities, the restrictions are different.
I understood. I know it's been a very difficult time. Lauren, what about the UAE? How are things going there?
So since June, when everything kind of opened up again, people were out and about, generally following the rules of masks and temperature checks when they go into the malls and things like that, sanitizing. But the local government in the UAE, as an example, it's different in every country in the Middle East, but over here, and most of the countries in the Middle East, actually, generally, people are really positive about the way that they've handled the pandemic. I'm pretty proud that they live here, especially the expats, when they look at some places that they're from back home, handling it very differently. They have very hefty fines in place for things like if you're not wearing your mask, if you're not adhering to social distancing. And I mean, the fines are the equivalent of $2,700 for a host if you are arranging a gathering at home. You're allowed to meet people out in the restaurants, but you're not allowed to have any gatherings at home. So that's made things very difficult over the Eid period and Ramadan for the locals, because they really, you know, it's a time that they get their families together and everything as well.
One of the things that I hear on this side of the world is, of course, everybody thinks that countries like Dubai or parts of Asia where they've been able to get things under control, it's some sort of dictatorship, but it sounds like stiff fines are having an impact.
Yeah, it really does work. It's, you know, some people are obviously annoyed with it, but at the same time, it's working, and it was working to keep the cases down. When we saw the spike in cases, it was really, it was just around holidays, public holidays, when people were starting to go out more. And I mean, the beaches and everything are open, but you get fined on the beach even if you weren't wearing your mask as well. There's hand sanitizer in every single shop as you walk in, and you get a funny look if you don't use it. So
Peer pressure also work.
Yeah, it's very organized, I think. Very organized, the way that they are managing it.
Oh, interesting. Now, let's hear from Michael Hughes in China.
So the situation for China on the ground here, they are still doing temperature checks on all public places. So every building you walk into, they'll take your temperature. In public enclosed spaces, particularly, everyone is still wearing masks. So that means when you're taking a taxi, riding the subway, these kind of things, people are still wearing the masks. And we've had quite a bit of success with that. But the sentiment is more of a courtesy. I recall taking a ride a couple of days ago, and the taxi driver was pointing out people on the road that did have a mask on. And of course, this is China now 6 months kind of since things have cooled down a bit here. And he was pointing out every individual who was wearing a mask. And I noticed that I had jumped in the cab and I was not wearing a mask. And I looked at him and smiled. I said, "Would you like me to wear the mask?" And he just simply responded, "Yes, please, would you?" So the sentiment here is there's no fines. There's no restrictions if you don't wear the mask in terms of penalties. However, everybody is kind of working together to wear them. And again, in closed public places, they are wearing them to protect each other.
And it seems to be working.
It is. We are back at a sense of normality, and we're very grateful for that. So it's working.
Yeah, impressive. MJ in Singapore, how are things going there?
Yep. Hi, Jim. Hi, guys. Well, as you know, or you may know, Singapore is well known as a very strict country already. You know, chewing gum is technically illegal. So when COVID rolled around, the government implemented very strict measures to follow, and with significant fines, as Lauren mentioned, in the UAE. So frankly, people are following the rules with sanitary hygiene, hand washing, sanitizer everywhere. Masks are required anytime you leave your home, in fact. So they're not only suggested, but required. And without a mask, people will be fined equivalent of $220 if you're found without a mask. For example, if you're riding in a car with somebody who's not your family member and you're caught, you'll also be fined if you're not wearing a mask. So it's really strict. And as Michael mentioned, in China, it's also working very well. Singapore is down to 1 case per day in the community. So that's pretty impressive. And life in general is pretty normal, which is nice, but it's normal with a mask on.
Wow. We all, I think, long for those days. The term normal, but what is it?
So a $2,700 fine in the United Arab Emirates for not wearing a mask. Wow. And in Singapore, strict law enforcement on wearing masks when leaving the home that has helped to bring the country down to 1 new COVID case a day. That's impressive and sounds like things are heading in the right direction when tough measures are put into place. But what happens when it comes to entering a country or traveling around once there? In part 2 of our series, we'll look at how COVID-19 is influencing international borders and how governments are responding. You can click the link to begin watching now.